Witch in Charm's Way, a cozy mystery audiobook, written and narrated by R.K. Dreaming. Part 16. Chapter 9. Beech Bum's Kingdom. That night I decided I had better keep my promise to Aunt Adele to do my best to help Lily, especially as I had not told Agent Constantine about who Sugar Daddy really was. First, I spent the rest of the afternoon and evening helping Aunt Adele serve food in her cafe. The flyers that I had left in the library had clearly done the trick, and a few dozen locals had found their way up to the cafe from the beach, and had been immensely pleased to find it open. They had all chatted enthusiastically to Aunt Adele, claiming that they had missed her cakes these past few weeks, and expressing how glad they were that she had chosen to stick around. Aunt Adele had so much fun catching up with them all about all of the latest gossip. It seemed that she knew a lot of people. Fortunately for me, the day was overcast again, or I would have had to go around performing my waitressing duties in the biggest floppy-brimmed hat that I could find, wearing gloves and huge sunglasses and probably a balaclava too. It would have looked absolutely ridiculous inside the cosy cafe. I had been an oddity among the townsfolk when I had left Brimstone Bay, given that I was a Westbrim witch with mediocre magic, an almost unheard of thing. Not to mention that the great hopes lit by my magic wild pink hair had fizzled out to nothing. I didn't want to be an oddity amongst them now that I had returned. I just wanted to fit in for once. Allegra would have chided me if she could have heard my thoughts. "Since when did you ever want to fit in, Esme Westbrim?" That's what she would have said. "Since when did you ever want to be anything other than your weird and wonderful self?" Allegra had always had an impression of me that was slightly different than my impression of myself. Despite the overcast day, I left the cafe every hour to rush to the bathroom and top up my sunblock. The daylight hours crept by horribly slowly. I was so glad when 4 o'clock arrived and the sun began to set, and the itching, burning sensation on my skin subsided. It had been driving me crazy. By 8 o'clock in the evening, the cafe had still not shut up for the night. But Aunt Adele took pity on me. She told me to go off and do my thing while she looked after our last few customers. I went back upstairs and eyed up my stack of books on my bed in dismay. My reading had not found me a single helpful thing. Even if it had done, next I would face the task of convincing myself to use my wand again after all these years. I didn't know what I would do if I found out that my last bit of magic had grown too rusty to cooperate. Would I tell Allegra my secret? Could I ask her to perform the spell I needed without telling her why? I paced around my room, too full of my nighttime pent-up energy to face reading through the rest of the books with their cramped, tiny handwriting. The mere thought of more hours spent trying to translate the Magio-Lingvo passages in them made my brain protest. I was out of practice with reading the language of magic. I was filled with that odd sensation again, as if the night was calling to me. It wanted me to go out. It wanted me to be free. And that was what was so very dangerous about it. It was tempting me into something new. And I didn't want it. And yet I had to go out if I was going to keep my promise to Aunt Adele. I went to the window and stared out of it. The sky was a shade of midnight blue filled with stars. The moon was bright. I could smell the salt air coming in from the sea. Beyond that line of trees was the cliff path leading down to the beach. All day, since I had woken up from the dream of Lily, in fact, I had been imagining the smell of blood. The iron tang had been particularly haunting the entire time that I had been working in the cafe, lingering as if Lily's spirit was reminding me of my promise. I knew the smell was my imagination, but it was so very real. Gosh darn it, I thought suddenly. Esme Westbrim, you are not a coward. And heck, my family already knew I was back in town, so there was no point in hiding inside anymore. I grabbed my jacket and headed outside. I took a lantern with me. I suppose I could have tested my magic by trying to light my wand tip, but the thought of using magic again was daunting. What if I failed? Lantern in hand, I went down to the bottom of the cafe garden. It turned out I didn't need it. The path here was strung with bright fairy lights and well lit. It was the steep downhill path that zigzagged along the cliff face all the way down to Brimstone Bay beach. The wind whipped through my hair as I went, bringing with it the fresh scent of the surf. How I had missed that smell all these years. It smelled like home. It smelled like a childhood spent building sandcastles with my cousins and waging war from our sandy fortresses, pretending we were the Brimstones versus the Hardwicks. Allegra, Flaffy and I had almost always played the Brimstones. Viv, Coco and Cora and the twins' little sister Cordy had played the Hardwicks. When I reached the beach, I took off my shoes and let my toes sink into the fine, soft sand. It was like silk. It was so odd that Humbles never guessed that Brimstone Bay was magical. How else would you get silky white sand and crystal clear turquoise waters in England? The summers were always hot here, the springs and autumns mild, the winters crisp and snowy. Perfect weather for all times of year. Enjoying the squishy feeling of the sand beneath my toes, I made the long walk across the bay towards Beech Bum's little kingdom. I smiled as I approached it. I could see the distant orange glow of a huge bonfire raging, and hear gentle music coming from the shadowy figures sitting around it. A few couples and small groups of friends were dancing. Their laughter rang through the night air. My cousins and I used to dance like that. I missed it. Shaking off my reminiscent air, I picked my way through the small crowd until I found Beech Bum. He was lying on a hammock and was playing a ukulele while he puffed away at a glass pipe that was emitting a fragrant purple smoke. The hammock was floating in midair and definitely should not have been doing so out here in public. Clearly there was nothing holding it up, and I was sure that a few of the gathered crowd were Humbles. And I wondered what reasoning Beech Bum had used to explain his minor miracle to them. It didn't matter much, I supposed. Humbles was so ready to believe in these marvellous witching tricks that brought tourists flocking to Brimstone Bay in the first place. The town's leaders had negotiated some leeway with the Conclave of Magic in regards to the International Magical Secrecy Pact when it came to things like this. "Hey there, dude," I said to him, unable to keep the big smile off my face. Beech Bum stopped playing his ukulele and pushed his dark sunglasses down the bridge of his nose to look inquiringly at me. A big smile creased his face when he recognized me. "Look at you, little Esme Westbrim back home again." He hung over the edge of his hammock and lazily opened his arms for a hug. Chuckling, I embraced him. "What happened to your hair, man?" he said. "The dude does not like this unnecessary artifice." I shrugged. He looked almost exactly the same as he always had, except the firelight was catching on wrinkles that had not been there before. His long, dirty blonde hair was still shaggy, and he still had the same scruffy beard. He hadn't adjusted his attire for the sake of the increased Humble tourism in town either. He was still wearing wizarding robes that he'd cut off at the knee, leaving the edges frayed. I had no idea where he had brought Hawaiian print robes from. Maybe he just transfigured them out of normal robes to suit his style. He waggled his finger at me. "For some reason, the dude thinks that you did not come here to party, young Esme." I nodded and said quietly, I think you can guess why I'm here." He chuckled. It was a lazy and easygoing sound, not the sound of a guilty man. "I wondered how long it would take someone to find me. Didn't think it would be you that came looking, though." He scratched his head quizzically. "Thought it would be that new fella, you know, the Hollywood one." "He'll probably get round to it," I said, "after he's done interviewing the other sugar daddies in town." The dude threw back his head and laughed. "Ain't no sugar daddies in this town like me, baby," he said. "Aren't you worried?" I asked him. "Ain't got nothing to worry about. Pull up a pew." He took his wand lazily out of the breast pocket of his robe and waved it, muttering an incantation under his breath. Beech Bum might be the most laid-back wizard that I had ever known, but he was very good at magic, which was probably why the town council hadn't managed to throw him out of his little kingdom yet. Another floating hammock appeared suddenly in mid-air beside me. He waved his wand again. I felt a bouncing gush of air beneath me, giving me a leg up into it. Beech Bum chuckled again as I half soared, half fell into the hammock. I laughed too. I had forgotten that this was why we used to hang out with him. He made you feel like you didn't have a care in the world. I lowered my voice so that no one nearby could hear us. "Have you heard about what happened to Lily Silverswift?" I asked. "Hey, you've reached the end. Comment the code phrase, 'It's a jungle out there,' to confuse everyone who hasn't reached this part of the story yet. Thank you."